Today I feel like talking about originals versus adaptations. What are some of the differences between writing an original play or musical versus writing an adaptation? And what are the ways in which each one can be challenging? So right off the bat, an original work frees you up from any kind of worry about copyright. If you are going to adapt something that is based on a pre-existing book or a film, or really any kind of work that has been created by somebody in recent years, you're gonna need to get their permission. Now this is where groups like the Dramatists Guild can help, because the Dramatists Guild Business Affairs Desk does have some templates of contracts available for you to look at and use as a model for you requesting this underlying rights usage. Or if that's over your head and you happen to have money, you could ask a lawyer to help draft up those contracts on your behalf. Then again, if you're a lucky artist who happens to have an agent, this is the kind of thing your agent might handle. Of course, none of this matters if the work that you are wanting to adapt is in the public domain. And this is where you have to do your research. Say you're doing the work of a dead author that's 100 years old and should reasonably be in the public domain. Well, if that author has an estate that continues to renew that copyright, you're going to need to ask for permission for those underlying rights from the estate. So already, creating something wholly original is just easier to get started because you don't have to worry about whether the source is protected by law or not. However, one of the positives that I do find when I have adapted work, and actually the majority of the shows that I've written have been adaptations, one of the benefits is that in general, the characters and the stories may already be laid out for you, especially if it's something like a book or a novel that you're going to adapt, in which we get into the characters' brains. Now, of course, you don't necessarily have to follow exactly what happens in the book, but usually when there is some kind of adaptation rights agreement, the original book's author usually requests the ability to kind of look over the script. But in general, when I have adapted existing books, I'm not trying to reimagine it in a completely wild way. I usually want to honor the original book so that fans of the book would then be interested in seeing the show. So with an adaptation, you're usually dealing with a universe that already exists in the original text or the original film. Whereas if it is wholly original with yourself, you are going to have to do the heavy lifting of world building. Depending on how you feel about that, you get to or have to decide things like time and place and all of the different characters and their names and their different personality traits and how they interact with each other. You have a whole open canvas before you, which can be very exciting, but perhaps sometimes a little paralyzing because there are so many directions for you to go. But again, on the flip side, with a wholly original work, you don't have to ask for permission from anybody else to keep getting that work produced. If you've done your contract right, that is. You're just going to have more control over what your show is and what you want it to be. Now, thankfully, with my adaptations, I've never adapted something where the book's author was being unreasonable or made all sorts of demands. In general, I've been really lucky to have just very aloof book authors who kind of let me do my thing and may or may not be interested in the final product. I am learning that when I do original work, setting it somewhere in the present day is a lot easier than to set it in either a fantasy world or a historical time, just because those things are asking for a lot more imagination and historical research. Whereas with the present day, there's just a lot of commonly understood things that you can just have happen in your play without having to contextualize it or explain it. Now, do I prefer writing original work over adaptations or vice versa? I might lean more towards being able to adapt things for the stage just because having that initial template is nice and then being able to explode that for the stage is really exciting. But no, original versus adaptation is not the deciding factor as to whether I'm interested. What really draws me in is whether there's a story that I latch onto, an emotional journey, an emotional arc that I feel excited to jump into and explore. But now, having done both originals and adaptations, I do keep in mind the different challenges and the different positives of approaching either one. All right, next week is exciting because I head to Washington, D.C. for the TYA USA board meeting. And then the following week, I will be in New York, just going around having meetings with folks, doing my playwriting, musical theater, writing thing. And I'll probably be vlogging from both of those locations. So I will see you on the East Coast next week.